Hi, thank you for joining me. This is Gary Zacharias. This is the Apologist bookshelf. Here's a book that I haven't done before, and I've had it sitting on my shelf for some time, and I like it a lot. Sean McDowell is an editor of a book called A New Kind of Apologist, subheading Adopting Fresh Strategies, Addressing the Latest Issues, Engaging the Culture. And a lot of people give it a thumbs up. Nancy Piercy says it's clear, accessible, and most of all, inviting. Just to give you an idea of the topics, and then I wanted to mention some of the people who are writing their chapters in this book. So the first part is called A New Approach to Apologetics, and that's actually what I want to cover today. Second part is New Methods in Apologetics. Third part is New Issues in Apologetics. So who are some of the people that are speaking? Good names here. Tim Muehlhoff, he's written books with J.P. Moreland. Tom Gilson, Mark Middleberg, who's a popular writer, Dan Kimball, Brett Kunkel, Holly Ordway. You know, we had Holly come speak to our apologetics class years ago, and she became a Christian because of one of the people who was involved in our apologetics, and she's become a really outstanding Christian professor. Lenny Esposito, Mary Jo Sharp, Mike Lacona, Jonathan Morrow, Jay Richards, John Stonestreet, Alan Schleman, Casey Luskin, Abdu Murray, and on and on. I mean, these are some really impressive people. So I thought maybe for this podcast, just to kind of introduce you to what they're trying to do. So here's the intro before we get to the first chapter. And it said, we're in a post-Christian culture these days, and we're going to find ourselves in some tough situations. And here comes the key question. Will we be ready? Will we respond with both grace and truth? He said, apologetics, now this is Sean talking, Sean McDowell, apologetics is not a spiritual gift for some. Okay, well, sometimes we think about that. Wish I had your gift. He says it's something we're all called to do. And then he has a quote. I love this quote. C.S. Lewis said, the question is not if we're apologists, but what kind of apologists will we be? And then his key thing is this: how we do apologetics has to change. And Sean says he hopes that we'll be challenged and equipped so that we can defend classical Christianity. And here's the part that's important: defend it in a manner that's relevant for today. He said, I'm hoping that your heart will be broken for the lost, that your eyes are going to be open to seeing how effective and important apologetics is for ministry today. But he says our methods must adapt. And he says the following characteristics would be what he hopes he would find in a new kind of apologist. First, humility. He says Jesus was the first Christian apologist, and he reasoned in John 5-8 with religious leaders, and yet, even though he's divine, he humbled himself for the sake of loving others. That's in Philippians. He says we can do no less, so humility. 2, we need to be relational. He said if our labels cause us to ignore the unique personhood of every individual, we should examine what we're doing and how we're going about it. Well, I'd say amen to that. 3rd, we should be studious. We need to do our homework. Sean says we need to critically examine our arguments and read both sides of every issue. It's easy to get tunnel vision, isn't it? Just look at your position and what your people say and ignore the other side. And he makes a good point here. If we make a claim that's not true, our credibility is going to go out the window. I know Greg Kokel has always said probably a good way around that is to say, that's a good question, that's a good point, let me get back to you on it. Better to say that, to say, I don't know, I'll check on it, than to say, well, here's an answer, and then find out later it was bad, incorrect. There goes your credibility. So besides these 3 things, he said we need to be humble, we need to be relational, we need to be studious. 4th thing is we need to be a practitioner. He says authenticity is a big plus for young people. They want to know not only if we can make a good argument, but if our lives reflect the truth that we proclaim. Isn't that the truth? Isn't that great? We say we have the truth and then we don't live it. So what we're going to say is going to fall on deaf ears. We have to live out the truth that we proclaim. So toward the end of his intro, he says, are you ready to make a difference in the lives of people? Are you ready to become a new kind of apologist? And of course, if you want to find out more about Sean, you go to seanmcdowell.org. So let's start in the first chapter. The intro is by Sean himself. and it's called A New Approach to Apologetics. And he again mentions that Jesus was an apologist. He gave people different lines of evidence to show he was the Messiah. But, he was not trying to win arguments just to win arguments. He quotes Dallas Willard. Jesus' aim in utilizing logic was not to win battles, but to achieve understanding or insight in his hearers. Jesus presents matters in such a way that those who wish to know can find a way to, can come to the appropriate conclusion as something they discovered, whether or not it's something they particularly care for. That's a great point, huh? We sometimes say, oh, we've got that situation, and I wish it wasn't that way, but it's true. He says Jesus was much more than an apologist, but he was no less than one. He said Peter and Paul and the other apostles used apologetics, and many of the early church fathers did too. What's Sean saying? Apologetics has been important for the church since it started. But Sean points out we're at a cultural crossroads. The world is more connected and diverse than it ever has been, and Christianity is growing worldwide. Yeah, no doubt about it. But in the Western culture, if you embrace Christianity, you're getting labeled hateful or bigoted. How are we going to respond? He says our approach has to change. We can't see outsiders as enemies, he says. That's kind of an us versus them mentality. We need to have a posture of humility and generosity and openness. And he quotes the president of Biola, that's Barry Corey. He says, we need to have a firm center and yet soft edges. That's a really good way to put it, isn't it? Have a firm center and soft edges. So let's go ahead and start his first chapter. This is Tim Muehlhoff. I like him a lot, too. He's done books with J.P. Moreland. He said during a training session he was conducting about people interested in apologetics, he asked if anyone knew of somebody in their family or a classmate or co-worker. Do you know of anybody who does not have a relationship with Jesus? Hands went up. And he said, what's stopping you from sharing the Christian perspective? And he said, some say, well, I tried to bring up God with a family member, but that person became defensive, so I changed the subject, so I don't bring it up. Other people say, well, I envisioned me speaking and it going badly, so I kind of psyched myself off. And he says the most common response is, I don't know how to organize such an explosive conversation. So Muehlhoff says, can you relate? Is there somebody you'd like to talk to? Give them the Christian perspective? But what's stopping us? Have we psyched ourselves out? Do we just lack a clear strategy? He said, we're aware today there's an argumentative culture. And the argumentative culture says, okay, the world out there and the people in it, that's an adversary. And it's contentious and people get angry. So we just want to ignore those things. Boy, I'd say this is getting worse and worse in the society today with politics. Everything is turned political. So Muehlhoff says, I found myself wrestling with things like, how can I remain faithful to my convictions, but communicate in a way that produces dialogue, not uncivil debate, not argumentation? He also asks, how can I balance truth and love when I'm talking with people who disagree with me? What if the person I'm struggling with is a spouse or a coworker or a neighbor? Can I keep our relationship? But it's a worldview that I'm sharing that some people find offensive. And he says, most importantly, where can I look for guidance? And he said, the book of Proverbs is a good start. He said they have broad principles in there. And he says, let's focus on 4 essential questions to ask when we're dealing with somebody who has a different belief system than we do. All right, so 4 questions we have to ask. Question 1, what does this person believe? So he goes back to Proverbs. Remember, he said you can find principles for communication in Proverbs. Proverbs 18:13 says, he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. So what's the first step? Muehlhoff says, listening. He says, if we don't do that, that's folly. We don't know what we're talking about, and it's shame. We're treating somebody as an inferior. So we need to store up knowledge. That's in Proverbs. So he said, you can't overstate the importance of listening. Before you respond, find out exactly what he or she believes. Many Christians, though, want to leap forward, though. He mentions humorist Dave Barry. He said, people who want to share their religious views with you almost never want you to share yours with them. Yeah, that's true. So why do we end up doing most of the talking? And by the way, I find myself in that situation. I want to do kind of a data dump on people without really hearing their position. So I'm guilty of this. He says, I think most of us suffer from agenda anxiety. We really want to get across our point, regardless of the person we're speaking to. We think we need to share more. And he said the problem is that one can be satisfied with his coverage of the content, but still fail to communicate. So listening is sacrificed so often, Muehlhoff says, when so much needs to be explained and there aren't that many opportunities, so we grab the person by the lapels and let them have it. But we need to allow the person to speak openly without fear of being challenged. So I think at this point, this reminds me of Greg Kokel when he says the first question you ask is, when you're talking to somebody, is what do you mean by that? You're just asking for clarification. So the first question, what does the person believe? Here's question 2, why does this person believe? By the way, that's Kokel's second question. Kokel says, why do you believe this? Right? So first, what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe this? And Muehlhoff goes back to Proverbs again. Here's Proverbs 16:25. There's a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. So we don't want at this point to talk to a person and tell them why they're messing up and why they're going to go over the cliff with their ideas. We need to understand why the way seems right to them. What's this person's personal or social history? All of our convictions and passions have a history to them, don't they? They can be traced back maybe to our family or personal experiences, influential people. So we could ask questions like, when did you first start to think this way? Who's influenced you the most concerning this issue? Were there any books or movies that shaped your perspective? Does your perspective deviate from your parents? He said, we don't often ask those kinds of questions. Here comes question 3. Where do we agree? I like this a lot. It's hard to see somebody as an evil nemesis if we find that we have common ground with them. So I like that a lot. Again, go back to the book of Proverbs. It says it extols wisdom and encourages its readers to pursue it no matter what. In fact, wisdom is personified as a woman, isn't it, in Proverbs, inviting everybody to come to her. And the writers of Proverbs believe that the voice could not only be found in Israel, but all across the nation. So all truth belongs to the Lord, says one Old Testament scholar. So the greatest skill that a Christian needs today would not be to debate necessarily, but the ability to recognize and affirm God's truth that's buried in what our neighbors say, what they believe. And it's going to take skill, as he says, to cultivate common ground. We need to seek out and affirm God's truth in every perspective. I think that's a really good point. Now, here's question 4. Based on this knowledge, how should I proceed? Okay, so can I go back for those 4 one more time? I'll talk about the 4th one in a minute. So question 1, as we're beginning to start a conversation, what does this person believe? So we can ask, what do you mean by that? Question 2, why does this person believe that way? Why do you believe this? How did you start believing this way? Question 3, where do we agree? And then question 4, how should I proceed now that I know this information? What do you do when it's your turn? And again, we go back to Proverbs. Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4. By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it, it is established, and by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. So step 1, we're gathering knowledge. What do they believe? Steps 2 and 3, why do they believe? Where do we agree? That helps prioritize their facts, and it cultivates some common ground. That's real understanding. So step 4, how to proceed, requires that we allow our personal communication to be molded by, are you ready for this word? Not used much today, should be molded by wisdom, the artful application of knowledge and understanding to people. Isn't that good? The artful application of knowledge and understanding to people. Yeah, wisdom is really lacking these days, and I admit I'm right up there at the top. So step 4, he says, we need to ask this question. With this person, at this time, under these circumstances, what is the one thing I should say? I like that. Not, what are 5 or 6 things to say? What's the one thing? He says, Muehlhoff says he tries to tell people to come up with a single communication goal. Maybe it's just to rebut. Okay. Maybe it's to clarify. Maybe you're cultivating more common ground, or you're trying to gather more information. Maybe you're affirming your relationship. Or maybe you're just setting up the next conversation. I thought that was good. And he tells a story on himself here. So when he was in grad school, he had an opportunity. He was at a public speaking course, and a young woman began her speech, and she lifted up the Bible and said, "The Holy Word of God." And then she threw it on the ground and kicked it across the room. And she argued the Bible was intolerant. And all eyes turned to Muehlhoff. And he was a professor at the time when he was in grad school. He was starting out teaching. He says, "How should I have responded? How would you have responded?" So he said he was angry. He was insulted. He sat there looking down at some notes that he'd scribbled. And he said, then Proverbs 12:16 came to his mind. "Fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult." And so he said, he didn't look up. He was still looking at the pad of paper from. He thought to himself, at this time, the class was almost over. Under these circumstances, a bunch of students looking at him, with this woman, I didn't know her well, what should be the one thing that I say? He thought about it. He said, I chose to dig deeper rather than challenge her harsh claim. So he said, I applauded her for her passion. I asked her where the passion came from, what had happened in her life. And she told the class that the year before, her younger sister had confessed to being gay, and her church communicated this woman. Said you could see the hurt and anger on her face. Says, I sat there too, and I just listened as the period ended. By temporarily overlooking her offensive actions, Muehlhoff says, I preserved the relationship for further interaction. I think that was really smart. I like his, toward the end of the chapter, he said, I wish I could say I always respond in such a way that people attack things dear to me. He said, I don't. Sometimes he said, I get so angry, and I choose debate over listening. But he said, I find that those 4 questions give me tracks to run on when engaging situations like this. And then he ends the chapter by saying, we sometimes are so zealous, we forget that communication is a give and take. It's a right to be earned. And he quotes a theologian, like yields like. You get back what you put in. What goes around comes around. No matter what we sow, the law of return applies. Good or evil, love or hate, justice or tyranny, grapes or thorns, a gracious compliment or a peevish complaint. Whatever we invest, we tend to get it back with interest. Lovers are loved, haters hated. So Muehlhoff ends the chapter. If we want our friends and neighbors to listen to our story, do you know where this sentence is going? I bet you do. If we want them to listen to our story, we have to listen to theirs. If we want others to attend to our convictions, you know where that's going, we should first attend to theirs. If we want others to cultivate common ground with us, we should do that first. He said that's going to create a communication climate where we can then fulfill our deepest longing to engage others in a respectful and a civil way, that we can that we could share a perspective that's changed our lives. We can tell them about Christ at that point. So Tim Muehlhoff is the author of this chapter. He's a professor of communication at Biola and written several books. The one book I like a lot he wrote with J.P. Moreland is called The God Conversation. And I used that in a Sunday morning class the other day. The God Conversation is a book that tells how we can use examples and illustrations and stories to explain our faith, because that's what people remember. They don't remember a lot of facts, and they don't remember a lot of philosophy. Boy, they'll remember a story. Think about Jesus and the parables he told. All right, so anyway, that's just one chapter in a wonderful book here. Again, the book is called A New Kind of Apologist. And if we're going to be out there talking to others, we have to be thinking about better ways to communicate. We've got people who are biblically illiterate. We've got people who are angry. We've got people who are going to challenge us and call us all sorts of names because of our Christianity. How do we navigate in that kind of society? And that's what this book attempts to deal with. Well, thank you for being part of this podcast, and we'll do another one really soon, and I hope you're having a good day.